that aspect a bit more shortly. But that's only part of being generous. We can be generous with our time. We can be generous with our homes. We can be generous with our love. We can be generous with our faith. The very first church that Liz and I were ever a part of was a small inner city church called Paran Uniting Church, and that's the best photo I could find of it. A little cream brick building there. Many of the people in that congregation were young adults like us at the time who were renting in the neighbourhood. Many of them were students or just starting out in the workforce. Most of the people were poor financially, didn't have a lot of money, didn't own houses, they were renting. But this group of people taught us a lot about generosity, sharing food, sharing hospitality, sharing equipment between a number of share houses. But this small congregation had a big responsibility. It was the oversight body for a large inner city mission. Next slide. That you might have heard of in Chapel Street in Paran. Paran Parish Mission has had various names over its history. At the time we were involved there, it was a multi-million-dollar sort of program of, various programs that ran out of that place. There was a cafe there, and it was one of the first to offer ministry to people struggling with mental health issues. And it was an early form of partnership with what became known as Uniting Care that is now Uniting. And Denise, who comes along here, she's not here this morning, but I think she worked there for a time. Much of the funding for Paran Mission came from the government, but there was additional support from other generous Uniting Church congregations. But in the way the church and its ministries have evolved over time, sadly the congregation is no more. It closed more than 20 years ago. But the community service programs of Uniting are still operating out of this same building in Chapel Street. When we think about generosity, our first clues as to what that looks like come from the nature and the example of God. God's a generous giver, providing what we need day by day, sending Jesus to us to show us God's heart, giving us grace and forgiveness, peace and hope. And the motivation for all that God does is God's love. So there's a very famous verse that you can all recite to me, but if not, you can read it on the screen. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him may not perish, but may have eternal life. I think you know that one. So God's heart of love leads to generous action in the world. The early church community were known both for their compassion and their generosity. The description of the little community that was formed in Acts chapter 2 suggests that people would donate goods, would sell their possessions, and distribute the money to anyone who was in need. That was a sign of God's generous spirit at work among them. And Paul actually lists generosity as one of the fruits of the Spirit. But despite what we might read in the Scriptures, and we can think of other examples, sometimes we struggle to be generous with our money and possessions, and I wonder why that is. Scripture would suggest that one of the reasons why we might struggle is that money holds a certain spiritual power in our lives. Jesus said that we can't serve both God and money. We have to choose one or the other. So we're needing to constantly fight against the human tendency that's magnified in the values of our current culture towards selfishness and greed. Here's a little test for you to do at home. So this is some homework. We might say that we put God first in our lives, that God's central to all that we do. But is that actually reflected in how we allocate our money, our time, and our other resources? So when you think of your own giving habits, does your financial giving come first, or does it come, further down the list if there's enough over? Do you come close to the biblical standard of a tithe? Of course, for many of us, balancing our budgets is quite difficult at the moment with inflation and the price of everything seeming to go up and up and up. And sometimes our income levels are fixed, so it's getting harder. And it's also true that we go through seasons of giving. At different stages or seasons of our life, we may be able to be more generous than at other times. John Wesley had a very simple approach to all of this. His response was, well, get all you can, save all you can, give all you can. It's a pretty simple approach. But maybe it's only rich people who can afford to be generous. Well, maybe not. Jesus criticised the wealthy Pharisees who proudly tithed their income and even tithed their garden herbs, but who neglected to pursue justice and mercy. So sometimes we can give out of our plenty and not actually be particularly generous. But on the other hand, Jesus praised the widow in one of today's other readings who was really quite poor and gave just a tiny amount, a few cents, but was really very generous, giving almost beyond her meagre income. At this point, I'd like to hand over, I haven't told them this, but no, not really, to Graham and Maggie, who could say this next bit better than me, because they've worked in this area of ministry for a long time. But it's true that we're likely to be more generous when we feel that the organisational group that we're giving to and supporting is doing good and life-giving work. Whatever that is, whether that's offering, cataract surgery for people in Africa, whether it's supporting asylum seekers in Australia who are denied any form of government assistance, whether it's donating food to Helping Hands, who support people who are struggling in our own local community here at Croydon. And today we're being encouraged to think of the many programs that are run by Uniting, that help homeless people, that help hungry people, that help those suffering from domestic violence, and a whole range of other stuff that you may not know about. According to Jesus' parable of the sheep and the goats that we heard part of this morning, we'll be blessed as we reach out and help these sorts of people. So we're going to watch a couple of short videos now from a couple of the leaders of different Uniting programs that they help to support, and just have a listen for the types of things that they're doing. So we'll have the two videos.
teams you work with are all passionate about what they do. They're really engaged in trying to make a difference for in people's lives, and trying to help build them up and give them the confidence to sort of move forward from the position that they're in when they come into our programs. And that passion sort of just resonates through all the teams.
Okay, so my name is Angela, and my role at Uniting is to engage with organisations from key priority groups to increase the reach for the Escaping Violence Payment Program. For example, multicultural communities, people with disabilities, the LGBTQIA+ communities, including people from remote and regional areas. A worker called me and said how the payment has helped their client escape family violence. It was a single mother, and she left her partner, and she had nothing with her. She was staying in a motel with her son, and they were just living on crackers and bread alone, just for the week. So yeah, she got to support her client in getting the payment, and with that, the client could slowly build her life and helped her secure a rental property, and that gives that stability in her life to move forward from violence. I feel that when a person is seen, heard and respected, no matter what circumstances they are in, it can profoundly impact their life. And it impacts their self-worth and connects them to the community. Yeah, I love the values of Uniting: compassionate, respect, imaginative and bold. And what resonates with me is compassionate and respect. But the other two, imaginative and bold, it reminds me of the work that I do. And it reminds me to be bold in my advocacy work, in speaking up for people that don't have a voice. And it's like that each person here at Uniting, that they're unique, that everyone has their own journey, and that journey has led us here, working for Uniting, to work together, to celebrate together, to respect one another, to dream, and to support each other, to boldly speak and fight injustice. And that's what I love. Yeah.
Feel like you would like to support those types of work at Uniting, we're inviting people today to make a retiring offering, and there's a little table on your way out. A few quick do's and don'ts when it comes to giving and being generous. First one I'd say is do give because you love God and you love your neighbour. Do give because you've got a heart for mission. You want to reach out into the world. You've got a heart to help people. And do give because you want to grow in your faith and your trust in God. I remember at one point Liz and I were doing some teaching in a church in Africa, and one of the highlights of their worship service, which went for about 3 hours, was the giving. And it wasn't like there was a bowl that got passed around, or like we do here with a bowl on your way in. No, this was a real highlight of the service. And individuals and families would take it in turns to bring their offering up to the front. And they wouldn't just walk up gently to the front. They would sing and dance, and everyone would be cheering, and it was a big deal. It was a huge part of their worship, this privilege of being able to give. But there's a few don'ts as well. Next slide. And the first one, and the most important, is don't ever give because you feel guilty or pressured. Often a message like the one that I'm sharing today is followed by a time where an offering bowl is passed around and people are invited to put money in and everyone's watching to see how much other people put in. And all we do is guilt trip people. That's no good. Don't give if you're living through a season of hard times, of high financial demand, low income. That isn't the time probably that you can give generously. And don't give because the minister stands up at the front and says, oh, that would be a good thing to do. It's much better if you seek God in prayer and seek God's wisdom and compassion and then decide what you'd like to do. When we look around at the church, I think we can easily adopt a scarcity mindset. And we can think, oh, our congregation's getting smaller, we're all getting older, doesn't seem to be too much hope for our future, we're scared that we're going to run out of